All right. Well, then I'd like to call the Community Development Authority meeting to order Thursday, January 9th, 2025 at 6 PM. I would ask that Rachel note roll call. And I would ask if you would lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance, Nishant.
I'll leave.
Well, we'll help you. Come on.
We'll do it.
Somebody else can start.
All right. I
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
You're here. I always want to say amen at the end of it for some reason.
Just want to say play ball.
All right. All right. All right. We don't have any announcements that I'm aware of unless you do, Alex. And we would then entertain a motion to approve the minutes of December 12th.
So moved.
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
We have a second from Sheila. Are there any edits, corrections, or changes? If not, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Appearances, we don't have any. This is part of the presentation. So we would move to new business, section 7 and section 18 transition update. Here you go.
This will hopefully be the fastest and perhaps the last one of these that I do. So we did officially.
It's only been 10 years, so yeah.
We did officially close on the transaction for our section 18 disposition on the last day of 2024. We have also had the removal of the declaration of trust on all our properties, so they no longer have a land use restriction on them. There will be some closing activities, sort of cleanup audit type stuff with HUD that we'll have to go through. I have reached out to the field office to see exactly what that looks like and am waiting for a response. So congratulations to all of you for sticking this through for, I don't know, 4+ years.
And thank you, Alex. I mean, I sat through this with 2 other executive directors and for a lot of years before that at the Housing Authority, and you brought it to the finish line with Rachel and Brandy and other staff supporting Carol. So thank you.
Yeah, I mean, it was definitely a team effort for sure.
Well, you guys got it done and we're happy. Thank you. And Jay, I'm sure that you were involved. So anyway, I'm glad that we're here and we got it closed. Presentation, discussion, and potential action regarding the submission of preliminary development plan and rezoning application to the Village of DeForest P&Z Commission.
Yeah, so I'll just kind of kick us off here. A lot has happened since the last time we met. So I'm going to try to recap as much of that as possible. But certainly if there's questions or anything, feel free to stop me at any point. As I mentioned in the memo, so if we are to progress in the next round of the tax credit applications, we need to have zoning in place for the project. In order to do that, we're kind of scrambling a little bit to get a concept level submission that will be reviewed by our Planning and Zoning Commission. I did receive 3 proposals for design services for the project, and Kaylor Slater, who's with us this evening, submitted the most competitive proposal. I'll kind of introduce them here in a few minutes, but I want to just kind of talk about the context for this process and what it's going to look like for us going forward. So we're planning to submit for zoning under the village's planned unit development ordinance zoning district, which is not a standard zoning district. It allows for a little bit more flexibility for uses and configurations. And this is kind of a 2-part process. The first part of planned unit development, a PUD, is the submission of a preliminary development plan and rezoning. And that essentially sets the zoning criteria that our second step, which is a final development plan or sort of the detailed site plan, will then be evaluated by. some of you may be a little bit more familiar with zoning than others. So when I talk about zoning criteria, this is things like parking requirements, density standards, composition of things like parking, green space, those types of things. And the draft of a preliminary development plan, the narrative was included in your packets for review. It's a little bit of a lengthier document, but that's eventually what we'll be submitting to the Planning and Zoning Commission. So the preliminary development plan, or PDP, and rezoning is first reviewed by the Planning and Zoning Commission, who then makes a recommendation to the village board, who then takes the final action on that, on both the PDP and rezoning. So this will go to the village board. The final development plan, FDP, when we get to that stage, again, that'll incorporate more of the detailed engineering, site plan, those types of things. That only goes to planning and zoning for review. I will, like I said, the PDP narrative is in the packets. I'll just go through a couple high level items in that, and then I'll probably kick it over, introduce the team from Kaler Slater, and we can get to some of the more fun stuff.
Before you do that, could you just clarify the dates?
Yeah, so yeah, that's part of why we're scrambling. So in order to meet that March 21st second tax credit submission deadline, we need to have approved zoning in place. And the only meeting that we can do that at Planning and Zoning is the February 28th meeting. And in order to get on that meeting for review, we have to submit this PDP on Monday. So we'll talk about it here in a little bit, but the folks here at Kaler Slater have been moving extremely fast to get this all wrapped up. I mean, we literally gave them the go-ahead last Friday. So you'll see the work that they've done in that short amount of time is tremendous. That's kind of those are the dates that we're operating under right now.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So that means the first board meeting in February, or in March.
So in March, yep, which I think is like the 4th or something like that. So to talk through the PUD, the general area of the PUD includes the liquor store, the car wash, and the duplex parcel to the west. I did get consent, written consent from the owners of the duplexes that they're okay with us including this in a rezone. If that property does not become part of this project, the rezone won't take effect on their property because we would only be coming with a final development plan on 2 other parcels. So they were comfortable with that, which was nice. Generally speaking, we're conforming to the zoning standards of our B1 Central Business District. Where we differ in the PDP, I've kind of called that out. So a lot of this, you can certainly read through if you want, but probably nobody will really care. The changes are in permitted and conditional land uses. Some of these were different than what's in the B1, just to give us a little bit more flexibility in terms of what would be permissible and what would not be permissible within the development. So if there's any questions on that, I'm happy to take them. Mostly that centers around commercial users at the facility, but there's also, you can see there's permitted use of multifamily as well as residential units on the ground floor. Those were changes or deviations that we're making. The rest of it is more regulatory standards. So the B1 Central Business District allows for a reduction by conditional use permit in the required green space to a minimum of 5%. We're proposing that would be allowable in this PUD by right. So we wouldn't have to go through for a conditional use permit. As we'll kind of talk through, I imagine we'll probably be, depending on what sites we end up with, we'll probably be above that 5% anyway. We're also requesting a reduction in building setbacks along the north and east, and potentially, depending on what our final submission looks like, south sides of the properties. This just means that we can take the building and structures all the way up to the lot line, rather than being a certain distance away from the lot line. Yes.
Not the street, though. It's still going to be
Correct.
set back from the street.
That's correct.
Okay, just from,
For the actual parcel properties.
so the side that is next to the duplex and then the side that's next to the body shop? Are those the 2 sides that you're talking about?
No, the opposite. So the street sides and the rationale behind that is just to give us a little bit more leeway to get closer to those from it may make a little bit more sense when we kind of look into some of the design pieces. And certainly that's a limit. We don't necessarily, and I think there are some options where we don't maximize that. Parking was another one here. So we are requesting a reduction in the required parking spaces. And part of that is we have 36 residents who right now, I mean, Jay was telling us our lot is at 50 or like 55% of the folks have cars. So we anticipate the residents that will be in this unit will be less relying on cars. So we're requesting a reduction in that as well. We're requesting an increased density to allow for us to get the full 60 units on this. Although I will say, if this site develops across 3 parcels, that will reduce the density and will actually be in the B1 standards anyway. But this allows for the potential that we just get 2 sites. And then lastly, no, 2 more. One allows first floor residential space in a building that also has commercial. And when we look at some of the design strategies, you'll see exactly how that plays out. And then the last point here is to allow for an accessory structure to potentially accommodate property management type of activities. So I will say that the narrative has changed just slightly. I included some language about lighting and signage and things like that, but for the most part, this is it. I'll pause there, see if there's any questions, and then if not, we'll bring the team up here and get to the fun stuff.
Any questions? No, it was pretty good explanation.
Okay. So if you guys want to come up and introduce yourself, we'll pull up the slides. If you wouldn't mind grabbing that, it should be in the L drive, Rachel.
Good evening. It's great to be here and helping you all with this fun project. I'm Joe Snett with Kaler Slater, Vice President, and kind of leading the team from our team.
And I'm Dan Kosher, also with Kaler Slater, architect and the project's lead designer.
And just so you know, in order to use the microphones, you sometimes have to get pretty close.
And you might just turn yours on and leave it on. Because is he going to speak at all?
Yeah, I'll.
Okay.
Okay, great. And can we go full screen? If not, not a problem.
We could minimize those pictures, couldn't we? Sheila could still see, right?
Just put it down.
Oh yeah, full screen right there at the bottom. Learn something new every day. Okay, thanks for the adjustment there. So we started on this, as Alex mentioned, last week, Friday, and one of the first things we've done here is just do preliminary analysis of the architectural context for the project. We always design, from a contextual basis and try to create timeless architecture that delivers great results for the communities and the users of the buildings that we design. So this project for us is not going to be any different. So we started out looking at what some of the built fabric here in DeForest suggests as far as a preliminary approach to a material palette. So we found a couple of really great sources of inspiration there. the Village Hall being one, the public library being another. And then there was a suggestion kind of in the prompt for us to look towards the assisted living and memory care building and the town square apartments as some additional kind of contextual things to try to be compatible with. And then finally, doing our own kind of look around town. The train depot struck us as a great historic structure that, you know, there's a possibility to kind of reference in some of the things that we're doing, potentially with color, potentially with how we're detailing roof edges, or even just architectural style that's compatible with the library, the train depot, the assisted living. They all have these kind of articulated roofs and brackets and things like that. So we've taken that to kind of a level of interpretation here with the kind of example palette below. That there would be a lot to determine here about color and pattern and you know, dialing all these things in specifically, but this is kind of a starting point that we thought was pulling from the context successfully. So we've got some brick. We noticed that there's some wood accents. For example, in this building, that could be a nice thing to bring into a residential building. Metal panels could reference some of the shingle textures that we see in some of this architecture, or could come from a different place. Limestone is always a nice, strong contextual material. And then a lot of residential buildings have fiber cement siding on them, which can take the form of many different patterns and textures and colors. We also pulled in some precedent imagery here that looks at a 3/1 building, maybe a 4/1, or some of these images, but they're approximating the scale that we're anticipating for the project, and then looking at how they break down their scale successfully, so that this building is not a towering 4-story project or a towering 3-story project. It's a sensitive 3-story project that at times looks like a 2 or a 1-story project. And then has some of those articulated roof edges that I mentioned in the precedent analysis. Some of these buildings step forward or create a separated kind of presence of a retail portion of the building, like image number 6. I'm sorry, image number 5 or image number 7. So we like that as well. We thought that was a strong way to give this some character and scale. These also use things like brick, stone, metal panel. It's a mixture of materials, not one kind of mono material. We felt that's probably going to be important to successfully breaking down the building's scale as well. And then we included one image here of a project that Kaylor Slater designed that has it's an apartment building that has some direct townhome entrances along its street. And we thought that may be a really interesting way to respond to the context here as well and make this feel like it's a part of the neighborhood. So we've also put together some massing studies here that look at 2 different approaches depending on whether it's a 2-parcel approach or a 3-parcel approach. This first option looks at just a 2-parcel approach. This is, call it an L-shaped building with a prominent retail on the corner. It kind of stands proud of the building, expressing itself. Could have a vertical expression like a tower. In keeping with this idea, this building would be a gateway to this new redevelopment on Main. This is a 3-story building, as I mentioned, but at the 3rd story, it steps back. The 1st and 2nd story could be somewhat proud to, again, give the building some shoulders and let it feel like the scale steps back from the street. This version has some retail and residential parking out on North Street that would be accessed from the north of the building, and then some residential parking underneath the building that would be accessed off of Main. And you can see in the 3-parcel alternative here that the western portion of the building extends, and we extend some of our parking to the north as well, and then provide a small area of parking in the courtyard to the rear of the building, as well as a green space for residents. We feel like that's a really important part of this project, to give them an outdoor space to spend time in. as well as this kind of green plaza that we have at the corner here. This is partially caused by a view triangle that'll be necessary at the corner when that street is redeveloped. But it also gives us kind of a place for, if that retail is a restaurant, perhaps that's an outdoor patio. And then the blue areas here on the plan that you're seeing are residential amenities that are facing to the north and connecting to a residential lobby as well as that green space. Option number 2 has a little bit more of an interior corner on that corner of North and Main. Again, that view triangle is part of that formulation. Then in this case, the retail occupies most of that north face. And that plaza that's created defines a space that can be used for residents or retail customers or both. Very similar approach in many other ways as far as stepping the building down and how the parking works, at least on the North Street approach. That parking is also under the building. And then we're showing some potential for some direct entry units along Main Street there as well, whether those are actual townhomes or more like flats that have a secondary entrance. The project that we referenced earlier also has that corridor entrance, but they have a secondary out front. That could actually be an actual entrance with steps, or it could just be a patio that gives the appearance of kind of a townhome. And then this is the second version of massing number 2 with the third parcel. So we again just extend that L and are able to wrap some of the parking around the rear of the building and enlarge the green space that the residents would have access to. So it's not so tight on the site. This one achieves 60 units. So that's kind of a key thing about these 3 parcel solutions is that they're able to achieve the required density. Here's kind of just a comparison of these plans. So you can see the difference in the layout. And then we've also got some images here comparing the 3-dimensional renderings. Thank you.
Wow. Since last Friday, I mean, I'm impressed, guys. Thank you.
Thanks.
I can't pick new fabric for my curtains in that amount of time, so that's great. So, questions, Rebecca?
So is there any possibility of getting that, the multi-family place or not? Or are they still wanting way too much?
So yeah, I mean, there is a possibility, 100%. We'll be discussing that a little bit further in closed session.
Okay.
So we can tackle that then.
Okay. The reason why I ask is because the 4 that you showed up there, the one where you had the drive all the way through, I really liked that because of a lot of different reasons. One, for emergency access, but also just for the flow of traffic, for the flow of the people easier in and out. I really like that. So fire trucks, the whole 9 yards, yeah. But I mean, any of them are going to be awesome, but that one seems to be the ideal.
Yeah, no, it's great to hear your feedback, and I think there's ways to create hybrids between some of the different things. So if you like the through access, that's something that can be incorporated, I think, in any of the options. Other than the 2 parcel, that gets a little tighter.
Yeah.
But when we talk about the 3 parcel, either option, we can kind of carry that through. I think the big thing to think about as a group is how we're positioning the building between massing 1 kind of pulls away from North Street a little bit and pulls away from Main Street, gives a little bit of a buffer, but really lets the retail kind of get closer. And then massing 2 is that approach where we're kind of getting to North Street, getting to Main Street, getting a little bit tighter. So there's kind of the 2 different approaches will present themselves very differently, both very good solutions, but will present themselves differently as your gateway or anchor into the redevelopment as it goes down Main Street. And I think one of the things that came up in our discussions this morning was thinking about North Street and if there is a potential for expansion and, you know, is that little pulling back from that worthwhile? Or, you know, or is everyone comfortable with how that may widen if we do go to the property line with the building in the future? How does that, you know, sit and present itself in the community?
I think it's helpful to pull back some from North Street. I mean, you have people also who will try to pass the building along there. So not only will North Street more than likely in not too distant future be widened, but there's other safety aspects to not being right on North Street, I would think. Other comments or questions? So tell me about the roof. So I like the setback. I agree. I mean, it's not just a block going up then. It looks less kind of oppressive when you have the setbacks. Does it cut into the number of units or does it damage anything by doing that? Do we lose anything?
You're talking about like in this scheme here where the building steps back slightly?
Yep.
No, we don't lose any units. We're actually doing it strategically to kind of create terraces, or it could be an opportunity on some of these on the second floor to place a small community room that has an elevated terrace that, you know, depending on how many balconies we do in units, we might not do a balcony in every unit. There might be a place that has a place for everyone in the building to go to that has a little bit of a balcony. So I think there's, maybe if we want to go to the precedent imagery, that might be a good
That's a nice.
way to like visualize that for them, Dan?
Trying to go backwards here. Oh. Thanks.
Oh, number 3 and number 1 both.
Yeah, so I think if you look at number 3 and number 1 and how like those step backs and, you know, maybe the space steps back, but the roof may hold the edge like number 1, or number 3 is an example where, you know, we hold kind of a datum that's more in scale with the homes across the street and then step back on that 3rd level and to create some outdoor space or, but we're not, in the options we're looking at, the step backs don't really preclude us from getting any additional units in any of the schemes.
That's really nice with the balcony. And Rebecca.
So of all of those, I'm glad we went back to this because my least favorite are 2 and 7. But just because they look very sterile, very typical.
Mhm.
And if we're going to have this be a gateway area, I don't want it to look like the place down in Sun Prairie or in Madison, or I want it to look kind of like what you were saying, incorporating some of the features that we have here in DeForest. And I see some of that in possibilities. I really like number 4, surprisingly, primarily because of that balcony area.
Mhm.
Or the community, it looks almost like a community area.
Mhm.
But yeah, I just want it to be both unique, but also not horrifically expensive at the same time, which is really not easy to do.
Typical Rebecca.
I think just to kind of clarify a little bit, Alex, and let me know if I'm overstepping, but the examples that go through here, we're not looking at landing on one of these specific designs. Like the number 7, the example is up because that kind of shows what that commercial bump out might look like in brick, and maybe we want the balcony from number 3 and, you know, overhang from number 4 kind of thing. So
Right.
just so you don't like.
Oh, no.
Think.
No, I knew that. I was just kind of, I just don't want it to be sterile. I want it to actually feel like a place where somebody would want to live.
No, Dan's pretty good at that. We pick the images and vary them quite a bit because we do want to see the strong reactions to certain things. so that we can kind of understand that from the group and hone in on the materials and details in the feel that you all like.
Yeah, I agree. That number 7 is really flat. That retail on there doesn't have much detail to it, so.
Same thing, on item 5 for me. It looks very industrial. That looks like it should be an unfinished elevator shaft going up above the 2,700. And
Sure.
we have an interesting dynamic going on that corner. Across the street, we have industrial park on one side, and across the street the other way, we have old homes. And then we have down around the corner, a little bit of commercial, or down the street the other way. So we have a number of things going on and this is defining a lot of the community there. So I'm hoping that it sets a tone for redevelopment as we go down Main Street.
Yeah, I think, and if maybe we go to those massing side by sides, I think massing number 1, where we have that kind of retail element.
Mhm.
I think we were talking in the office the last couple of days of, this is an element that can kind of stand out and, take some liberties architecturally and can kind of be that transition between the industrial and what we're trying to set up with the residential scale and the townhomes that continue down Main Street. So we see that as a strong option to kind of anchor the corner. But that being said, also we like the re-entrant corner of the other option and really creating a public plaza that becomes a moment at your gateway down the Main Street redevelopment. So it's kind of, I think we like the options that we put out because they present different things and it can do different things for setting up your redevelopment in the future.
I do like that, I don't know if you call it a bump out. The other thing I like is if we're going to have commercial in the front on the entry levels, having parking there so people can get into the store or whatever it
Mhm.
ends up being readily without having to interact with a lot of the residents is probably a good thing for the residents.
Yeah.
And probably for the commercial establishment as well.
Yeah, and as Joe mentioned, that possibility of some hybrids out of these options, developing a way to get a little bit more parking to activate the residential on Massing 2 so that it doesn't feel like you have to go behind the building to park successfully for that. We think there's a way we can do that too. So to bring best of both worlds together here. Likewise, I think with these massings, we can look at, if we go with the re-entrant corner version, I think there's a way that you could articulate that corner to have some kind of a vertical element that still acts as that gateway identifier. So there's a way to bring these two things together, I think.
What was the blue? If you go up, yeah, so what is the blue that's outlined?
Those would be residential amenities. So it'd be the lobby, package room, mail room, leasing office, fitness center, lounge, other amenities for the residents. We're using some of kind of the street facing areas to activate the first floor so that we don't have kind of dormant uses on the first floor towards North Street. It's kind of our strategy on all these options. And then the ground level residential units would really be down along Main Street where it starts to match the homes across the street. And, we don't see real value in having any residents on the ground floor with their actual units facing, North Street and the industrial. So we're trying to minimize the number of units really that have that northern view.
The other thing that I was thinking about when I saw this, and, I think we've discussed this a little bit, we could end up with, if we're, some of it's workforce, having some kids in the units. And I think the idea of having some townhome kind of entrances available without having to go through the hallway is very attractive to me. I mean, I think about my grandkids coming into my house, for instance, and, you know, it's noisy and it's active and it could be very beneficial to have those outside access points for units.
I think I saw Sheila had her hand up online.
Sheila?
Yeah, you answered my question because the question I had was where I was having trouble with the map, seeing where the ground floor units were entering. And I did notice on the other slide, it said direct access. So you just answered my question.
Okay, good. We're sorry that we have minimized your face here a little bit, but can you see everything?
Yep, I see great. And it's totally fine to minimize my face.
Okay, thank you. Other questions? So this is just sort of the preliminary, calling a massing. I don't know what that means necessarily. But the next step will be taking some of the feedback and getting more detailed, or what happens? Tell us about process.
So for the sake of the preliminary development plan, which we're submitting on Monday, the thought is that some of the precedence imagery, which we kind of reviewed here, to take some of the more design elements, I guess, to include some of that into the submission, as well as one of these sort of, we'll have to pick an option, how this building situates on the site, similar to the diagrams that we're looking at now. Because one of the things that complicates the submission is whether or not this takes place across 2 or 3 parcels. We may do a strategy where it maybe it kind of shows a dashed property line, something like that. Here's the building on the development across 3 and slice, piece of it off if it's only on 2. So the submission itself will be more conceptual in nature, sort of like what we're looking at now. And then as we get past that initial stage, we'll start to dig more into the details and have some more back and forth and kind of fine tune this thing.
Becca?
So if I'm understanding, when you're doing the submission, you said you had contact with the property owner next door. They were okay including it so long as if they don't end up selling to us, that
Correct.
doesn't actually take effect on them,
Yep.
right? But okay, so with that in mind, I mean, of these 4, if we ended up with only the 2 parcels, my preference would be massing 1. But if we ended up with all 3, my preference would be the bottom massing 2. That's my personal opinion.
Sure.
I think the parking on the massing 1 for the 2 parcel, I think is probably better for the commercial aspect. Kind of gives a little bit of separation from the residential, kind of like what you were talking about a minute ago.
Yeah.
Talk about the underground parking too, because
Yeah.
that's part of it.
Sure. I'll let these guys talk about it. I was just going to say, I think what Joe mentioned earlier about sort of what actually gets up into the submission will probably be a hybrid between some of these. So it's important to get the elements that you like of each and communicate that tonight. That'd be helpful, but you can talk about the parking.
So the parking in the 2 parcel options, there's just not enough land, so it will be under the building footprint. We didn't have time to contemplate on the 3 parcel, but on the 3 parcel, there will be opportunity to bring that parking kind of out of the ground a little bit, and that'll save a lot of costs as far as the cost of providing that covered parking. We have some of that land to the west to kind of tuck it part under the building. There's some kind of gymnastics that we can do to make that happen and pull it out of the ground a little bit. And that should help save some cost on that standpoint. So I think the advantage that we have is there's about 7 or 8 feet of grade differential from North Street to the southern portion of this parcel. So in all these schemes, we're taking advantage of the natural topography to bring the cars into the structured parking as far south as possible, so that we're kind of coming in and going down as little as possible. So I think the end solution, if we're on a 3 parcel situation, is we would have parking that would kind of sit in or out of the ground, a little bit into the ground as it goes to the north. But in any of the scenarios, we would keep that parking shielded from North Street and Main Street so that you have active uses on North Street with either amenities or the retail and the townhomes on Main Street. And I think that's an important thing to keep and maintain is we're always shielding that parking. You know, we're not providing any open parking decks or blank facades. I think it's going to be really important to keep activation on the ground floor on both North Street and Main Street to really kind of help spur the redevelopment and be that gateway for what you're looking for.
One of the beauties of the somewhat underground or in the back, how do I say this gently? Some of the cars that are around are kind of beaters. They're older and they've been well loved or used. And so you wouldn't want cars of that nature parked around the front of the building if this is Gateway. I mean, we'd hear about it. It's just a thought.
Yeah, and I think in the two parcel options, we're providing one stall for every unit underground. And then we have on Massing 2, it's really the retail parking that's less than ideal for the retail. But that would be the surface parking, but the resident parking would be all underground in the two parcel options. So I think that's important to note, like as we look at this, the two parcel options, the resident parking is all accommodated under the building and just surface parking is meant for the retail. And I imagine some guests or, for the residents. And then on both options for the three parcel options, we'll get pretty close to the amount of parking for the residents covered, but we will still have some surface. But all that surface parking, again, will be shielded by the building and kind of in the back. And I think we'll use that as a buffer to the other properties. So we'll probably hold the western property line like we're showing with the parking and then really create nice green space in the leftover space for the residents. So that'll be kind of really a resident focused on the inside of the L and the back of the property.
Alex, where would the stormwater be accommodated?
That's something that we'd probably have to dial into as we get farther along in this. Stormwater requirements for infill or for a redevelopment project like this are a little bit different than what they would be for greenfield. So I imagine that probably means less on-site that we have to have retained. But yeah, I don't know exactly how that looks.
Yeah, the thing you have going for you is there's a lot of impervious surface already on the two lots. So we're adding minimal. We might actually be providing more green space at the end of the day than what's currently there.
The other question that I had, I'm sorry, I don't want to cut anyone else off, is do we have to do a lot to upgrade the utilities to have that many units? Okay.
Sorry, we'll have to have different service than what's out there now, but I don't think we'll have to do anything with the public infrastructure.
Okay. That's good to know. Well, this is fun. I also is there any potential for movement if we're trying to get away from North Street or not? Well, we're quite a ways back on all of them, aren't we?
Yeah, I think that when we talk about the two parcel or the three parcel options, something Dan and I were chatting with today is the parking in the front, especially the Massing 1, when you look at that one in the lower left, it could just be head-in parking along the retail and amenities and just a drive, and we could eliminate, the back side of the parking because we are over parking that in a way right now. And it's kind of a middle ground because it could slide the building, another 18 feet or so closer to North Street, but still provide that buffer, but, not a full typical tray of parking that's double loaded. And then that would allow for a little bit more green space in the south. And I think that would allow that Massing 1 to have that loop road to be able to connect through the backside. So that's where we start talking about the hybrids. I think there's little moves, things we can do to generate the best of all the options shown.
I think one thing that's really, really a good idea is having a spot where you can come in and drop people off or pick people up, or the ambulance can pull in. And I see that on the 3 parcel, there's kind of a place to pull into. I don't necessarily see that in other drawings. Maybe on Massing 2 top right, they could go in, but how can we accommodate that? I mean, I think in a lot of senior and disabled housing, you know, you'll have the bus from the community center, and you'll have families, and so it's something to look at. And then are you suggesting on Massing 1, 2 parcel, and where are they going in to get to the underground parking, I guess is it from Main Street?
It's at this point here, there's a ramp,
So it's right on, off of Main Street though.
right?
North Street is dangerous because they'd be crossing multiple lanes. If they're coming, and they're coming from a stop sign.
And I think that's an important thing to evaluate and consider in the value of the 3 parcel. Because if we can get the through access on both, either option with the 3 parcel, that entrance on North Street could just be, you know, right in, right out. And you could control that a little bit and really get people over to Main Street. And then if that intersection of North and Main are controlled in the future, it gets them, you know, queuing distance away from that intersection, a controlled intersection. Now they can go west at a controlled intersection instead of trying to, you know, jump out on North Street. So from a safety standpoint and kind of traffic flow for the city, that it is something to consider with the options.
It's important. Rebecca.
I'm assuming all of these, we're going to be having an elevator, at least one, correct?
Correct.
Is it just one? I mean, those are pretty expensive. I don't know if we're only going to have one or if we're going to have 2. Like one at one end and one at the other end or something like that, just because, I mean, we're going to have people that, some of which are disabled.
I would guess that it probably depends on what this building looks like from a dimensioning standpoint.
Okay,
But I don't know what the actual requirements are.
but at least one.
Yeah, there's no code requirement on the number, but our kind of general rule of thumb is it's 1 elevator per 50 to 75 units.
Okay,
You know, there is considerations with who the residents are going to be. You know, elevators aren't perfect. They don't operate 100% of the time. And you're at 60 units, so it's, you know, maybe not quite enough to justify a second one, but from a convenience standpoint, it could be something to consider, but it is, you know, it's a fair amount of cost per stop.
the other question I have would be, with that thought in mind, that elevators don't always work. We need to take into consideration how these people would get to their units, especially if they're in a wheelchair, if the elevator is not working. And in which case, do we restrict people with wheelchairs only on the bottom floor, or do we allow them? You see where I'm going? Or do we have ramps built in? I'm just thinking long-term here and access, making sure that we have reasonably decent access, but at the same time, everything adds up money. So,
Yeah, I mean, those are all things that we'll have to consider as we continue to design it, but they're all, I mean, we know that our current residents have a lot of those needs too, so we'll have to think about that.
Although the advantage now is everything's on 1 floor.
Yes.
Jay, do you have any thoughts? You're right in the middle of this and working with our residents every day.
No, I just think that you guys are nailing it on the head with the questions you're asking. I was lucky enough to sit in on the meeting on Tuesday, whatever day it was that we just said, the days are scrambling together a little bit, but, yeah, it's gonna be a balancing act between figuring out what we can afford and what people want and what we need. So, I think Spence said multiple times, just getting out your opinions so that we can, when we do get further along in the process, that we can have stuff more dialed in.
Okay, thank you. Obviously, you'll be in part of the process, so as you have thoughts, keep them out there. All right, anything else that you want us to know?
I think we covered a lot of ground. It's been good feedback, and we do have just a couple of days to kind of wrap this thing up. So we are going to be looking for action tonight from the board to authorize a submission, however it's worded in the packet, of the preliminary development plan and rezoning application. So, assuming there's no other questions, I guess I'd be looking for that.
Okay. With that, I would entertain a motion regarding the submission of a preliminary development plan and rezoning application.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Second.
We have 2 seconds. I think Sheila was first, so. We have a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion?
Only I'm very excited.
Yeah, the images make it a little bit more real, doesn't it?
It does. If there's no other comment, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
It's an amazing amount of work so far. Thank you. Do you have like computers that do these generated? Yes. It's a lot of work. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Item 7.3, resolution authorizing a chairperson and executive director to execute all necessary documents to acquire property located at 420 North Main Street, tax parcel number indicated in the item. Okay, I bet you this is Alex again.
Yep.
This was in your packet.
Yeah, so there's a resolution in your packet which authorizes the issuance of a jurisdictional offer to acquire the property at 420 North Main. The amount, that 272,500 that you're looking at the bottom of the resolution there, incorporates both the appraisal amount, which the full appraisal was included in your packet. The property was appraised at 261,000, and then it also includes the relocation amount for personal property, which was also included in the DOA approved relocation plan. That was 11,500. So should the board approve this resolution, what will happen is we will send the offer via certified mail to the property owner. They will have 20 days from the date of service to either accept it or reject it or do nothing, similar to some of the other mailings that we've had to this point. If they don't accept, they have 40 days from the date of service to basically take an action at circuit court. So the onus is on them to come to circuit court and essentially contest our authority to do the condemnation, which we have the authority. So there's not really much to contest there. If they don't accept or if they do nothing, then we can make a payment in the amount that we're talking about here to acquire the site. So that payment we would make to Dane County. They would hold it, and the property owner would have to collect those funds. We'd have to file the relocation order, which was also included in your packets, and a list pendants with the county as well. But essentially, the date that we make that payment to the county is effectively our closing date on the property. So after that, the property owner would have 2 years, up to 2 years to negotiate that acquisition price. Should they so choose, that would probably require a lot of legal expenses on their part. So, but you know, if it comes to that, it comes to that. So what I'm looking for tonight, I'm happy to answer any questions, but what we'd be looking for is approval of this resolution, and then we will go ahead and go forward with that process.
Questions? Rebecca?
One, I would move to approve, but two, my question is, you said they would have up to 2 years to negotiate the amount, but they would not be able, after we made the payment and it officially became the property of the CDA, they would not be able to contest that at that point. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, only the amount.
Yes. So
Okay.
if it went through a process where it was negotiated over 2 years, essentially Carol would lose her mind.
We don't want that to happen.
We don't want.
Well, I do move to approve this.
Is there a second?
Second.
We have a second by Nishant. Any further questions or comment? If not, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
I,
Opposed? Motion carries. Our experience so far is they don't comment, or he hasn't. Yeah, it is shocking. But it's kind of how he's been operating, so he'd have to change. All right, thank you. No old business, so we'll move to reports, and we'll start with the Housing Division and Jefferson Square Financial Update.
So you had in your packets the first report from Attic Angel. So these are the versions that they have put together. Now, these are not set in stone. So if for some reason these are not easy to follow, or you'd like to see them in a different format, they have offered to make changes to make it easier for you to understand. But this is, okay, how you will see them coming forward unless we tell them otherwise. The one thing I noticed that is quite different from how we used to do it is if you go to the second page. Oh, well, that doesn't help me then. There you go. So the way they've laid this out now is they're showing, we used to have kind of a column off to the right where we showed operations, and then the column next to it was your capital spend. They're doing it, you know, kind of next to each other and then showing you a combined total. So you're seeing your monthly activity, and then you're seeing year to date. Now, one of the things that we always did is we always had the budget for the whole year. We didn't show a year to date budget. We just showed the full year's budget and then gave you a percentage
Oh,
of
yeah.
what's been spent or what was remaining. So they've actually taken the budget and divided it out 1/12 per month. And they're now showing you essentially 11/12 of your budget, not your full year's budget.
So they are assuming like
An even
span.
spread across the year, yeah. So that is the one thing I noticed that's quite different from how we have done it in the past. And, you know, for things like utilities that are really common and monthly type activities, that works fine. But there are other things like I'm thinking your snow removal or your, you know, landscaping activities. You're going to have several months where there's no spend, but you've got the budget kind of growing as you go. And then you're all of a sudden going to have all your spend in a few months. And so it's just going to be one of those things you have to remember that you're looking at a year-to-date budget, not the full budget. So if you don't like that and you want to change that and go back to how we used to do it, we could ask them to do that. But if you are comfortable with how this is presented, we can just continue to see it like
My
this.
question is, are you comfortable with it? I mean, if you're not, then we should go back.
I did reach out to Attic Angel too and ask them in the future if they could include bullet points, if you would, Alex's suggestion of items that were of note that came about so that we, Carol in particular, isn't scouring through every number trying to figure out where where we should be and, you know, where we are, especially for bigger expenses and, you know, things that are going on of note.
Right.
And they agreed that that was something they would look into doing for us. So that would help, obviously, kind of, you know, at least focus our attention in the right spaces in the documents.
Have we been comfortable overall with their management so far?
Yeah, I have no concerns.
Demery's comments are always positive. You know, they don't have any resident complaints. Still haven't heard any resident complaints about anything that's gone over there. So always take no news as good news.
And I've talked to people, we, have fellowship hour between services at church, and there's a number of residents from, and they're all fine with it. So,
Perfect.
yeah.
So as far as the actual numbers are concerned, the only thing I was going to point out to you is that what Attic Angel refers to as earned residency fee, that is our, what we used to call the life lease. So that 25% that we get to actually call revenue when we sell a unit, that's what's now in that earned residency fee. And you'll notice November's number jumped up quite a bit all of a sudden. That is due to a recent GASB standard. Now we can only recognize, this year's portion. You can't just take that whole 25% and call it revenue all at once. You have to spread it out over 13 years. So that was just recognizing this year's portion of those fees. So that is pretty much your annual revenue for that line item.
Rebecca?
On the variances, the variance columns, what is that variance for each one of those, so that I'm understanding what I'm looking at?
So it's comparing, the first variance is the comparison of your November actual combined compared to your November budget.
So they're below budget?
Yes, so that, those first line items that are revenue,
So it's not that they've lost money, it's just that, okay.
we just haven't
That's
put in as much
confused.
as we as.
I would say that's kind of confusing to me when I'm looking at it.
Okay.
If there was a better explanation for what that is versus the next one, the 105,090. Does that mean they're over?
We're over for the month of November.
And that's
of
what you
was
were just
budgeted
talking
for the month
about.
of November.
Okay.
But that's because we just plugged in the whole year's worth of.
But then you
revenue.
go down to the interest income. So what is that?
That is truly your November interest. We've been doing really well with our interest. So
So why is the one up above a negative and then this one is a positive?
because you brought in more revenue than you had budgeted to bring in. It's positive to us. We brought in more money than we expected.
Okay.
But for monthly fees, that's the opposite. We brought in less than we expected. So that's why it's a negative.
Oh, got it. Okay. If I read more clearly then that would have
Which is
made
why I'm
more
kind of
sense.
trying to show you, like on a month-to-month basis, it's hard to compare to budget because it's timing.
I agree.
So then
Really should just look at your year-to-date.
yeah, so at the end, year to date, they've brought in, or it's brought in 15,000 less.
Yep.
And
But thank goodness for your interest.
yeah, I would say so. Wow.
And part of that is, so that's the monthly fees, right? So part of that is we did have some vacancies for extended period of times. If you recall, we had 720 that was vacant for a number. But even so, I think that does seem a little high.
So are we still going to be getting the, how many units are empty and stuff like that we've always got?
Coming up.
Oh,
Okay.
excuse me. I'm sorry. So that is with the year-to-date budget. Okay.
It's okay.
All right. So as far as Jefferson Square, that was the one thing I wanted to just point out, or a couple of those differences. But if you're comfortable with that, we'll just go ahead and let them continue to submit the reports in that fashion.
We'll probably get used to it, but if we don't, then we'll go back and ask for changes.
I guess my main question is are you comfortable with what you were seeing there?
Okay, good. Yep, we had a meeting after the reports came through and I had a few questions and we made a few changes, caught some things that hadn't been recorded yet and that is the final version now. So yeah, they've been responsive to our questions and seem like everything's being handled very well.
Do
Mhm.
you want to just go ahead and do the public housing financial update?
Sure. Not anything unusual. Did you have any?
No, I was just gonna say, there's really nothing unusual at all from the November financials that we got here. I've been really conscious of, spending money at the property with all the uncertainties and stuff with this transition that we're going through. Residents have been great about that too. We do have, like I said, what we're discussing tonight is the November financials, and yeah, there's nothing really of note at all in the November financials. I would, because we have something going on with this transition, and to make you guys aware, because the transition happened so late in the year and all the stuff that has had to come together as part of that, we are not receiving from WIDA our subsidy for the units in January. They've relayed to us that we will be made whole later, hopefully February is when that will happen. To the tune of, we received $11,683 in January for our rent out of the 43,000 plus that we will be, totaled. So we're hamstrung a little bit with money, but we're lucky enough to have the redevelopment stuff that has a little bit of money that Carol's moved around for us to be able to
Magic.
continue, to be able to continue to function really. Because of course we, still have an ancient building that we're fighting with and vacancies that we're trying to make usable. So just thought you guys should know about that.
And we're kind of comfortable that it'll be in the first quarter that we'll get made whole?
It'll be February.
Okay.
It just ended up being with the timing of when we actually went through with the approval, because WIDA had to have the vouchers approved as well, and all of it was just getting backed up. So we're going to be shoestring for January, but we've got a plan for it, and then February we'll get all that backlogged.
Okay, good. All right.
As far as the housing summary next, I got a report from Demery about Jefferson Square. Still have the 2 vacant units. One of the 2 is spoken for. They are planning on moving in February 1st, if not sooner. So that they're wrapping up all of that process. 720 DeForest Street is also still vacant. Attic Angel decided to lower the price to $265,000. Yep, it is the one with the barn. They decided to lower the price to hopefully make it more attractive to potential residents. She also noted that the barn is nearing completion and was hopeful that when the siding all got finished on that it would also be kind of more attractive to residents instead of a ongoing construction issue, that it's a finished product. She said there were no maintenance issues to report and still no resident issues at all. So happy to hear that, of course. Public housing, we still have 2 units that are vacant. The Meadow Lane unit, it's been painted, the carpet was installed. So that's coming along pretty good. The 132 unit is a little bit slower. We had contractor was ill and a lot of that sickness going around. And honestly, with the financial stuff that we've been going through, we've been just kind of holding back a little bit. As part of this process, we're still, we don't have an application form yet, official application form. So in the process of constructing that, so that we can get these things leased up when they're available and complete. And what else? else? We did get the leases signed, as Alex said, last week, or the last week of December, all the leases got signed. A lot of work from Rachel and Alex helped out on letting me take a day off, which was fantastic. And then the last couple days, we've been signing the actual vouchers from WIDA with all the residents. So had a lot of interactions with people the last couple weeks, and they're excited too about the new building and are looking forward to hearing the updates as we have them available. So
And we got rid of nervousness over the leases?
yeah, there's a lot of wordsmithing that you have to do with some of the residents to make them understand what the situation is, and happy to do it. Everybody takes to it a little bit differently. But I think that we got, everybody understands the process, especially with the second trip through with voucher signing and understanding that part of it. So that's a positive.
Good, good. Any questions for Jay? If not, thank you. All right, we will move to the redevelopment division. Is there any update there, financial?
The only things of note that I'd point to, you'll see a $500 application fee. That was for the tax credit application that's in there. And then both legal and consulting fees for that application, but also for working through the site acquisition on some of these projects as well.
Okay. That's legitimate. Anything else you want to share there?
Nope.
Okay, well then we will move to, there are no communications. And I would entertain a motion to convene into closed session.
So moved.
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
A motion and a second. Roll call, please.
Jane, do you need to read before I do roll call? What we're going into close about?
Sure, good idea. The Community Development Authority Board will convene into closed session pursuant to section 19.851E of the Wisconsin statutes for purposes of deliberating or negotiating the purchasing of public properties, the investing of public funds, or conducting other specified public business whenever competitive or bargaining reasons require closed session. Tonight, establishing a negotiating position to acquire property in redevelopment project area A.
Okay, thank you. All right, Commissioner Briggs,
Yes.
Commissioner Upadier,
Yes.
Commissioner Witherspoon,
Aye.
Chairperson Cahill Wolfgram.
Aye. It's so different because it's usually in the front and
I seem to have lost sound.
Motion to adjourn.
we had a motion and a second to adjourn. Were you in favor of that?
Indeed, yes.
All right. Please add her vote. Thank you, Sheila.
Thank you.
All right, here we go.